of Joshua. This morning, I'm speaking on 3 verses. 3 of them. And I'm setting a timer because I don't want to keep you long. I know it's 3 verses, but we're going to unpack a little bit. So, we're in Joshua 1. We're just finishing Joshua 1. I'm going to read these 3 verses. It's Joshua 1, verse 16 through 18. And it says, they responded, they being the people of Israel, they responded, answering Joshua, we will do whatever you command us, and we will go wherever you send us. We will obey you just as we obeyed Moses. And may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Anyone who rebels against your orders and does not obey your words and everything that you command will be put to death. So be strong and courageous. Joshua is hearing from God in the very beginning of this chapter in Joshua. He hears from God. And he hears the plan that God has for him and has for Israel. And they all kind of know the plan. But this is coming down to brass tacks. Like, this is what's going to happen. And God gives him this plan. And he says, all right, go share it. And just for you guys to understand, he addresses, Pastor Fred talked about it last week, he addresses Reuben and Gad and half the tribe of Manasseh. And he tells them, all right, we're all going to go across the Jordan. You guys can leave the kids and the wives, they can all stay here, but you guys, you men, are going to go fight with your people. The interesting thing about this plan is for you to understand this, is that Gad and Reuben and half the tribe, their land, the promised land to them, is on that side of the Jordan. They don't have to cross over. They have to sacrifice something of themselves in order to help the rest of the tribe of Israel, God's people. So that kind of just rounds out why this is so important. He's addressing all these people. So my first point is, do you trust in his plan? Do you trust in God's plan? Because there's this crazy part where God is talking to these people, and he's talking to Reuben, and he's talking to Gad and Manasseh, and he's like, all right, here's the plan. You guys are going to have to leave the land that I've already promised you, and you're going to have to go and fight somebody else's battle. Because essentially, your battle has already been done. You've made it through the wilderness. You've landed. It's like buying a home and then God's like, all right, but now you got to go on mission. You're like, I don't want to go on it. I would like to stay here because I just started this whole process. But God's plan sometimes doesn't affect you directly. And I think sometimes inside of us, we see God's plan and we see it and we're like, oh man. And it doesn't affect us directly. And we don't really know that sometimes until we actually see the full plan. Are you okay listening and taking in God's plan for your life if it doesn't directly affect you? You know, I think sometimes we look at the verses in the New Testament, and we sometimes look at it and it says, God's going to do all things for the good of those who follow him. We think it's going to be the good for us. But it's not always the good for you, it's the good for God's plan. God's plan is different than our plan. It doesn't abide by our rules. God has an ultimate goal. Right? He created us so that we would worship him and love him, and we betrayed that trust. We were kicked out, and from that point on, we needed a Messiah. And people thought for thousands of years that it'd be different things, that Jesus would be this actual emperor that would come in and save his people, and God was like, no, that's not what it's going to be. And then other people thought that he was going to live kind of this hippie life out in the desert, and they were going to separate themselves from the rest of society. And God was like, no, that's not what's going to happen. Other people thought he was going to come and he was going to lay down the law on all these people who weren't listening to the Old Testament scripture, and God's like, no, it's going to look way different. And he brings a baby. God's plan sometimes looks so different for me and you. It's so absurd to us. Can you do something for others? Is that something that you find yourself doing without any hope that people are going to see you doing those things? How many of you enjoy appreciation for when you do something for somebody else? Right? We all do. That's a nice thing. It's good for you to appreciate when other people do things for you, but it's really nice when people actually respond to that. They're like, thank you. Wow. And sometimes we don't get that, and God's like, that's okay. Look at these people. They were already at home. They were at home base. But they had to leave and go fight battles for their friends and for God's purpose. Have you spent time lately asking God what His plan for your life is? Because each one of our plans in our own lives looks a little bit different, right? I mean, our goal is the Great Commission, and in youth group we just talked about this, that we're going to go and go out into the world and disciple people and bring them into the fold of God and baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We all have that end goal, but how do you get there? What's the plan for your life? Is God calling you to open up, a small group at your work? What is the plan? Because sometimes I feel like we're in the middle of a plan, and some of you that are older, maybe God has already given you a vision of what your future is going to look like or what He has for you. But inside of that plan, sometimes God gives you another plan and says, this is how this is going to happen. And the funny thing is that our plans in our own lives don't often match God's plans. And it's because we're focused so much on ourselves and what I want. And I want more, and I want this, and I want a nicer car and nicer things. I want a better position. I want people to like me. And God's like, that's not all part of my plan. For some people it could be. For some of you maybe it is. But for some of you, for most of you, that's not God's plan. God has a plan. And the crazy, the next point is, how do you respond to His command? Now, the difference between a plan and command is that the difference is that the plan and commands, the plan is the theory. It's the idea. It's like drawing it on a board and saying, all right, this is kind of what's going to go on here, everybody. This is how it is. And the command is the execution of the plan. And sometimes this is not fun. This is the difficult part of it all, right? It's one thing to hear the plan and be like, all right, we have to leave out of our comfort zone and go do things for somebody else, even though it doesn't benefit me. I'm not going to be benefited. Nobody's going to cross the Jordan to come battle my family, because it's going to take a lot of planning. They're either going to have to go all the way around the Jordan because they're not going to be able to walk through it, or whatever, and they're like, no. And we're looking at it going, people aren't like, I don't have to do this. And God's like, but you need to. It's part of my plan. And something that's interesting in the Bible is that God gives us an example. He gives us a few examples of what people are like when they answer God's plan or don't answer God's plan. You guys ever heard of Jonah? We talked about that a little while back. Jonah gets this plan that God has given to him, and then God gives him the command to execute it, and Jonah runs. Jonah runs away from the plan and command of God. God says, go. Jonah goes the opposite direction, and God's like, all right, you're still going to do what I asked you to do, but you're not going to have fun doing it anymore. I'm going to drag you kicking and screaming. And even at the very end, right? Like Jonah's on the boat. He gets thrown out of the boat. He gets eaten. He gets spit up later. And he has to walk of shame all the way back. And he gets there and he tells the people that he hates that God wants them to love him. And then he's like, oh, please, God, don't let them turn. And then they turn and they're like, we love God. And he's like, I hate you. And then he goes and sits on top of a hill looking over the valley. And he's like, oh man, I really hope they burn. And then the book ends with him just saying, I'd rather die. But was God's plan fulfilled? Yeah, absolutely. We don't always like the plan that we're given, and especially the command. The command is sometimes the hardest thing because the command means we have to follow orders. How many of you guys like people telling you what to do? No. If you're married, good Lord, you know what I'm talking about. If you work at a job and you have all the right answers, God bless you. Right? It's the worst. If you could own your own business and be your own boss, you'd do it. And even then, you're not your own boss because you got to serve somebody else, right? You got to do something for somebody else in order to make some money. But the command is so difficult because there's this plan that we look at, and sometimes we shake our head and we're like, no. I don't like the plan, God. And then the command happens. And he says, go and do that. And sometimes we're stuck. Like, God, I don't want to run away because I know what that looks like. But there's a story of Hosea in the Bible, and God sets up this plan, and he's like, I need to speak to my people. He's like, okay. And it sounds like a good plan so far, and then God's like, all right, you're going to represent me. He's like, sweet. Yes, I like this plan so far. He's like, and that prostitute over there, that's going to be Israel. And he's like, I don't see where you're going with this one, God. And then God's like, you need to go marry her. And he's like, but I'm a man of God. I'm a prophet. I'm somebody who tells people what God's plan is. And you can't expect me to go and do that. And God's like, no. What you don't understand is that you guys are like the prostitute. You're living a life that you shouldn't be living, and I've given you all the things that you should have and be happy with, but even though I've given you those things, you still want to walk away. So he has to go marry this prostitute, and they live this life, and she walks away from him. They have children, and he says, go get her again. He's like, she's disrespected me. She's walked out of my house. She made me look like a fool. God, I can't do this again. And God's like, do it. And he does it. And it's this crazy story. It's this crazy story of this plan that we look at, and we're like, man, there's no way they're going to do that. And then you hear the command of God, and God has this power, and he's like, go. And they do it. And it's not this like great, grand plan, that we think of, like, God's going to allow me to represent him. And I'm going to have this like saint status along the way. You think that's how he felt? No. You think Job would have chosen the life that God gave him if God said it right up front? Hey, your family's going to die. You think Job would have been like, that sounds like a great plan, God, thank you. No. The plan doesn't always affect you in the greatest way. But if it affects God's plan, then praise the Lord, because that's what it means to be a good and faithful servant. It's this crazy thing because Joshua just takes over for Moses, and they've been wandering through this wilderness. Right? They've been wandering, and they've just been doing all these things, and they don't respond to God's command, and God's like, all right, walk around in this small little area of land until all the old people who didn't listen to me died off. The children can live, they'll grow up, they'll be old enough to, when we get there, when we arrive, they'll be the ones that take over. Man. Do you follow commands? Do you follow the command that God has given to you? It's hard. And like I said, we're often in our own lives, in our spiritual walk, we're not going to be the ones who give the commands most often. You are going to be receiving the commands. God is going to tell you, go and do this. How well do you respond to that? I think if we're really honest, we don't respond that well all the time. When you're standing in that grocery line and you see that person in front of you who's struggling with something, and you can tell And God's like, hey, you should just say hello to that person. Just say hi. You're like, that's awkward. I'm looking at the gum, Lord. My phone is in my hand because I don't want to talk to anyone. That's why I'm looking at it, Lord. How about this? We have been talking about praying at 8:18 for a good while now. A few weeks we've been announcing it. How well have you been doing with that? Subpar, mediocre. If you're like me, I set an alarm at 8:18, and my alarm goes off, and for the past week or so, our kids have been, for some reason, going to bed later. We try and get them down at 7:30 so we can have a couple hours of peace and quiet. It hasn't been happening this past week, but I set this alarm, and we're putting our kids to bed, and the alarm goes off, and I'm like, the kids, I gotta get them to bed. So I snooze the alarm, or I turn it off, and then I go and do things. I go to sleep, and I wake up in the morning, and I'm like, oh man, I forgot to pray. What's interesting is sometimes we're giving commands by God, and sometimes we're giving commands by God, just like Joshua, who gives it to us. And our spiritual leader in this church is Pastor Fred. And he is leading us, and he's walking us through this. And it's not this grand title, he's the spiritual leader, everything rests on his shoulders. It's just that God has appointed him to be here and to lead us. And God gave him a word, and God gave him a mission for our church. And you don't want to be dragged along the back like Jonah. And so what I did, because I come here every day, my kids are at school here, and then I teach PE here, and what I have done now is I can't, the 8:18, I'm sorry everyone, the 8:18 doesn't work for me all the time. And so what I do is when I show up here in the morning and I see the building, I start praying for the church. And it's not something elaborate like, oh, Holy Father, Mighty King, right? It's just, God, I just pray for this church. I pray for unity. I pray for this building project we have going on. And I just pray that we can come together and find what your will is for us here today, now. Amen. It's over. But it's because 8:18 is a great reminder, but not all of you are going to do it. But how about every time you think of somebody from church, or how about every time you think of this building, or how about every time you show up to Bible study here or something? Listen to the command that God has given to us, because it's not just for no reason. It's not like Pastor Fred was like, this would be fun. Let's just all get together and... No, there's purpose. There's a plan behind it, because God is pushing us forward into something new and into something greater. And we can't just sit here stagnant, excited about what we have now. We have to be looking forward to the future across the Jordan and say, this is what God has for us. This is the plan that He's had for us since the beginning, and we need to go and achieve it. And we're not going to leave people behind just because they feel okay here. No, we're pushing forward. Being stagnant is not good. What if you stayed the maturity level that you were at 5? Like my daughter? Good Lord. We would be great servants of God, that's for sure. Because we'd ask why about every 10 seconds. How do you respond to His power? How do you respond to God's power? Now, the Israelites understood the power of God. I don't think we truly, and I'm being honest, I do not think you and I understand the power and the gravity of who God is. In the Old Testament, I think you understood pretty darn well. In Psalm 111, verse 10, it says, "Fear the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the foundation of true wisdom." There's a pastor, Francis Chan, and he does this series for young adults and youth students, and I did it with my old youth group, and we went through it, and it's the foundations of Christianity, and then there's 8 videos, and it's about prayer, it's about faith, and all these different things. But the very first video is so strange to me when I first saw it. It was fear. And it's not like, ooh, I'm scared of God. It's a righteous understanding of the power that God has and why I fear that. And if I fear him, then I know the consequences of not following him. Does that make sense? The fear of God is so important. It is the foundation of faith. Why? Because I understand, I try as best as I can to understand that God said words and created things. Isn't that amazing? Wouldn't it be cool to say things and have things happen? I think we get part of that feeling from Siri. We're like, Siri, what's the weather today? And then Siri tells us back. She's like, today's weather in Tustin. And you're like we feel a little bit of what God has got going on. But God's is like, hey, light. And then the sun is there. And you're like, hey, earth, let's separate the water in the sky. God just says things and it happens. God moves in the Old Testament differently than he moves in the New Testament. And there's reasons for that. We're not going to explain that because that's a whole course of knowledge that we could go on many, many weeks discussing and still not fully understand it. But God moves differently in the Old Testament. And when he says things, they start happening because God is all powerful. And the Israelites really understood this because when they disobeyed God, first of all, they got brought into Egypt. And they started listening to some commands and listening to what God was doing through this guy who had a stutter probably. And he was he did things and things happened. A snake turned out of a staff and he said things and the water turned into blood. And they were like, okay, there's some power here. And all of a sudden the waters part and they walked on dry land. They understood the power of God. And you want to know what's funny is that they forgot about the power of God as quick as they learned it. Isn't that amazing? You and I don't see those things. I think if we open up our eyes around the world, we might see some of the power of God and some of the things that he's doing across the world and nations that are really striving after who God is. There's revivals all over this world. God's doing some amazing things. But what's interesting is that the Israelites forget about the power just as quickly as they see it. But they learn. Well, now they learn. They all died. Bummer. Right? They learned because God was like, you don't understand. I am God. Now walk around for 40 years in a 10-mile span of land and don't turn left or right. Just keep on going. 40 years. Stop. Now you understand. Cross that river. Oh, yes, God. I'm there. It's a similar fear as when you were growing up, and the fear of your parents. If you had mean and cruel parents, I apologize. But if you had good parents, truly, and you feared the judgment that they bring down on you when you did something wrong. Anybody have that? I had that. I had a good righteous fear of my parents. It was scary sometimes. It's the same idea. They have power over you. Why? Because they can bring judgment upon you. But God is just so much more than that. It's more righteous. And it's amazing. My last point for this morning is, do you recognize his affirmation? Now, in order for you to recognize affirmation, you have to have prior knowledge of something, correct? We understand that? The sentence that I wrote, I didn't fully understand it when I wrote it, and I'm like, I still don't know if that's the right way to phrase this. Is it up there? Yeah, I don't know. But it's the idea of, to be affirmed in something, you have to have prior knowledge of something. To be affirmed that you are a good musician, you have to understand that, oh, I'm a musician. Right? And so, are you being affirmed in some things in your life? Are you being affirmed in the plan that God has for you? Because here's one way that you can figure out. If your plans do not match up with God's plan for your life, you're not going to be affirmed in your plans. you'll be affirmed in God's plans. But if you're not listening to God's plans, when other people speak into your life, you're not going to hear the affirmation because you don't know what God has already told you. If you're not spending time in prayer, if you're not spending time in the Word, you're not going to hear from God. Unless He drags you along like Jonah. Unless He just starts pulling you with Him. He says, why can't you understand? I have a purpose for you. And it's not for you. Maybe it's for somebody at your job. Maybe your purpose in life is to make yourself look a little bit silly so that somebody else gets a chance to go to heaven and be with me. I don't care about your feelings in this matter because there's something more important going on. Your understanding of my plan in your life is more important. The affirmation is crazy. I mean, if you read the first 9 verses where God is just speaking to Jonah, He says things. In verse 9, it says, be strong and courageous. Look what the Israelites say right back to him. In verse 18, the Israelites don't hear God's instruction to him. God is speaking to Joshua alone. Joshua's praying to God. He's like, what is the plan? And God's like, here's the plan. And when God finishes explaining His plan to Joshua, He tells him, now be strong and courageous in this. Be strong and courageous in this. Understand that I am with you. The very last words that the Israelites say to Joshua after they already tell him, we're with you. We're with your God. We want to follow you. Now Joshua, as a people, let's be strong and courageous. Man, does that give you the chills? Have you ever been affirmed in God's calling into your life? I remember Jamie and I were struggling at our last ministry just to kind of feel our purpose and feel our calling there. And so we were praying one day to God, and we just spent time with our family, and we were just like, man, God, give us something. We need to hear from you, God. Because we feel like we're just running on a hamster wheel, just going in circles. We're not going anywhere. And I specifically remember this because this doesn't happen to me very often, where God just said, I'm going to make a new thing happen in your life. And the very next day I was fired. And I was like, cool, that's exactly how I would have planned it. Right? When I heard that, I woke up Jamie because we were driving back from Knott's, like our whole family went out, and it was real late. We were coming back to the desert. And I heard that word from God, we're going to make something new. And I thought to myself, okay, God's going to mend the relationship that this pastor and I have together. We didn't work very well together. We had different missions, different goals. And I was like, maybe that's what's going to happen. Or maybe I'm going to move into like a new position where we're kind of working in ministry together, but not under. And I thought maybe I'm going to get a new job. Maybe I'm going to start looking. Jamie and I were like, we're going to start looking for jobs elsewhere because everyone knows this is not working out very well. And the very next day, something new happened. And it wasn't what I was planning. My plans were for myself. And God's plan was for something else. And Jamie and I heard that and we're like, wow, awesome. So, fast forward, how long was that? Like a full year. I've been applying to churches and getting really far in these processes of becoming a youth pastor in some of these real big churches. And right as, last interview of like 8, they're like, you know what, we're going to go with somebody else. And it's just like, man, God, what's your plan? God's like, I'm going to make something new, dummy. Listen, I'm going to do it. You're trying your best to just go out and do the hustle part, but I'm not in that hustle part. Just follow me. So I applied to a furniture store in the district, Aki Homes, and I worked there for 6 months, and I sold furniture, and I didn't apply to any churches. And then Jamie and I were looking on a website, and I saw this thing for this church called Grace Harbor in Tustin, and it was conveniently right. We lived down Newport, right? Yeah.